G'day. Today we're going to have a look at the RoboBrew. I've been asked about it a lot. I've used it 5 times now. I've done 5 brews on it. First I'll just give you a quick look at what you get when you buy one. A lid, which is great for bringing your water up to strike temp and during mash as well, to keep your temperature steady. An immersion chiller, stainless steel immersion chiller. You don't get these hose clamps and clips, so I've put those on myself. Your grain pipe, tube, whatever you want to call it, that you put your grain in during the mash. And the unit itself. So we'll start by having a look at the main unit. It's basically an urn. The elements are enclosed. I'll give you a quick look inside. The temp probe down the bottom there. It has 2 elements, a 1900 watt and a 500 watt, which is handy to have, I've found. There's inside, and there's a little temperature probe down the bottom there. You might be able to see it looks like a rivet, and just the hole for the tap, back of the tap. That's it, the elements are enclosed, as I said. And it's got a nice little display down the bottom here. I'll show you how to use that more in the brewing video. It's got the temperature and 2 little symbols, one for when the heating elements are on, and one for when it's in the sort of a delay mode. Sometimes you'll see your temperature up by a couple of degrees down here, or down by a couple of degrees, and the elements aren't on. And that's just because it gives it time for the temperatures to even out. It's the same with any system, whether you use an EST or a 3-vessel system. If you change the temperature, things just take a while to even out. You know, it's like with your mash temps. You don't check your mash temps immediately when you mash in. You wait for everything to even out, and you'll find that will happen with this. I've had a digital thermometer in the top during the mash, and even though this was displaying, you know, maybe sometimes a couple of degrees higher, sometimes a couple of degrees lower, the mashes remain stable, which is what you want, and it's worked well. Besides that, there's a little tap on there. It does look replaceable if you wanted to change it to I haven't bothered changing it at the moment. But it is just a screw-in fitting as usual. So I'll move on to the mash pipe. It's just a pipe with a perforated bottom. It's got holes in the bottom. The wort to drain through, nice and solid, all stainless, and seems to have worked well since I've used it. Now you also get the little stand that you fit on top of there and sit the mash pipe on, or grain pipe for draining and for sparging. Can be a little bit tricky to do it by yourself sometimes when this is full. It's handy to have someone else, but I've managed to do it the last 5 times by myself. It's a bit fiddly, but that's with any system. It doesn't really matter what it is. If you're holding up you know, there's probably 15 kilos, sometimes probably more in there. It can be a little bit tricky holding that up one-handed while putting this on. Now we come to the immersion chiller. This has worked fine. I actually prefer to use my plate chiller. That's just a matter of preference though, and uses a little bit less water, my plate chiller, than this does. But I've used this and it works. And something to remember about the immersion chiller, when you're chilling, the elements are down here and they're still warm from the boil, and they take a while to cool down. And because the temperature probe's down the bottom of the urn, like it is in most of these systems, this can be reading a bit higher. I don't know, mine usually says around 40 or 30, when the actual wort is a lot cooler than that. It just takes a long time for those elements to cool down, and that's nothing really to worry about. You can tell by feeling the side, or you can have a temperature probe in there to see where your cooled wort, what the temperature is at wort. Besides that, this works. It's a bit hard here sometimes on the really hot days, but that's just the groundwater temperature. That's the same with all these sort of chillers. If you've got a pre-chiller, that'll get rid of that. In winter, that'll be fine. That'll smash it down. Now, if you are using an immersion chiller with it, or if you just want to be a bit cleaner with your hops in it, you might want to get a hop basket. These don't quite fit properly. You need a clamp to hold them up to the top, because these are built for the kegs. Or you could modify this by bending it or drill it and put a screw so it hooks up to the top. I just use a clamp to hold it up to the top. If you don't want one of these, I've always used a grain bag for my late edition hops when the basket's full. So that's just a grain bag, fill it up with hops hanging over the side and clip it on. Try not to get it down the bottom. Of course, like with any of these things, you don't want it sitting on the elements, but that's easy enough to do with a clamp on the side too. Otherwise, you can just throw your hops in. It has got a dead space of about 3.5 litres down the bottom, so there's plenty of space for your trube and hop matter, all that junk. But the bonus is if you do use a bag or a basket, you can tip up another 2 or 3, maybe another litre, 1.5 to 2 litres without getting too much of the trube that's settled in the bottom if you've used your Wurf lock correctly, and it all settles out. The other thing some people might want to use with it, it's not really necessary. I've done it on one brew just to test it, but all the other brews have been successful without it. Is people have been talking about putting a pump in it, using a pump with it. So then it's closer to the grain father, but it's probably not necessary for a brew this size. But if you are going to buy a pump and you plan to use it regularly, get a good one. Those little $20 brown pumps will end up failing. They're good for water, those little things, but once you have wart and sticky wart, and maybe little bits of grain or whatever going through it, it's going to seize and you'll need to replace it. So if you're going to use the brown ones, little brown $20 pumps, buy a couple of them. If you're going to buy a couple of them, you may as well spend a little bit more money and get a better pump. Pump like this, which this one's from KEG too, magnetic drive. You do have to back them off. They go a bit too fast for things like this, but back it off on the outlet with a clamp or something, and I use it and it worked fine. I'll show some footage. Unless you're doing massive temperature jumps and that, a pump's not really needed, but if you do want a pump for a system like that, it's no problem. It's a simple hose from the tap into a pump and into the top. You do have to watch your flow rates. Don't go too fast because it sucks the water from down in between the mash tube and the grain tube, whatever you want to call it, and the side. And if you suck too fast, you'll empty out your water before it has time to drain through the grain bed. So you do have to watch your flow rate. And if you got it too high, that's probably a little bit too high. You might have to turn it off and wait for it to even out again, and then you can just turn it back on. As I said, I don't think it's really needed for a brewery this size, but if you'd prefer it, go for it. It's that simple. The only other thing you might need is some hoses, especially if you're using a pump, or if you want to go into your fermenter from the tap. Besides that, you get everything you need really. Or you might want a spoon to stir the mash. That's about it. Something else to remember, the max line on the urn there is 29 litres, just to let you know. So it's 29 litres to the max line, and you don't want to go much over that for the boil, because you will get a boil over. You can be very careful and try and fight it off, but you go much further over those max line and that's going to get harder and harder to do. So with 29 litres, and if you're not tipping up out of the dead space of 3.5 litres, if you work that out with about 4 litres of boil off, 4.5 litres of boil off, you're only going to get about 19 litres to 20 litre batches out of it. With tipping it up and getting some more of that out of the bottom, you'll get up to your 21, 22 litres if you're careful, and don't lose too much through your hop absorption and things like that. I'll quickly run through how you can work out your sparge waters. Even the instructions say for most beers to mash in with 16 to 20 litres. I tried 16 the first time and I added another 2 litres because it was too thick. And I ended up putting up to 20. So most of the beers nowadays, I mash in with 20 litres to start with. And if it's around 5 kilo worth of grain, you're going to be sparging with about 14 litres. Now the same with all these systems, your sparge water will have to be heated up somewhere else, you know, on the stove or whatever else you've got. But that's just what happens when you've got these all-in-one systems. If you're going to sparge, you need hot water to sparge with, or it works a lot better with hot water. And so you heat that up somewhere else. I'll quickly show you how I formulate my recipes at the moment for it. I had a few issues. I tried to use the Grainfather setup and the Brew in the bag setup through the Beersmith, and it just wasn't right. The efficiency for some reason was set much lower than what I get with this. I've been getting in the 80s to 85, even 86 was one mash efficiency, which is really good. So I didn't check the Grainfather efficiency. I thought it would be about the same as this, but for some reason it was set lower. I don't know what that reason was. I like how simple the unit is. There's not much that can go wrong. Don't boil it dry. I don't even plug it in till there's water in it. I'm not going to plug it in and show you the display now because it's empty. Fill it, put water in it first before you even plug it in, and you shouldn't have any issues. It does turn off anyway when it's unplugged, so if you do accidentally plug it in, it shouldn't be on until you turn it on. But I like the simplicity of it. Personally, I think that's a benefit over the Grainfather. The Grainfather is the built-in pump and all the piping, and everything's built in it, and I just like the simplicity of this. There's not much that can go wrong besides you blowing an element. Whereas a Grainfather, you know, if your pump stuffs up or the pipes or you lose a bit or something, it's a pain in the ass. People saying it's a rip-off of the Grainfather, it's not a rip-off of the Grainfather, I don't believe. It's just another single vessel and brewing system. If anything, the Grainfather was probably a rip-off of the Brewmaster, wasn't it? So I don't care about that stuff. I've just been having fun brewing with it, and I've enjoyed it. I like the small footprint of it, very small. As you see, it's all packed up in this, compared to my other brewery that takes up half of the garage. Anyway, if you grab one, I hope you enjoy it. I've enjoyed brewing on it. It hasn't been a hassle. Clean up is a breeze. Seriously, you know, you empty out the grain pipe, give it a wipe, and it's the same with the bottom here. After the boil, it's not all crud stuck onto your elements because the elements are concealed, and it's just a simple wipe at the bottom. You don't have to use a scourer or anything like that. It just wipes off. Quick hose out. Of course, you know, I shouldn't have to say, but it has got air vents down the bottom. You don't want to get water in them, so just be careful. Now, one thing I will recommend is to insulate the pot. I'm not sure if he's selling covers for these yet, or insulation jackets. He might be, I don't know. I've seen the Grainfather has them now, but I've always used for all my things that I need to insulate, just like an exercise mat. And if you whack that on, it keeps your mash's temps brilliantly. It still does alright without it, but it works a lot better with it, especially because I brew outside. It helps a lot. Now, if you're going to use something like this exercise mat like I do, and you boil over, it will stick to the sides, like happened to me last time. My wife distracted me by putting a child in my care while I was on the boil. I got a tiny bit of boil over, but it stuck to the side, but I still got it off without any issues, without marking it or anything. Another thing that's worth mentioning, I think, is your strike temps. If you have your water at the right temperature, and you've measured the temperature of the grain, and you've put it in a calculator or worked it out yourself, and you mash in at the, you know, and get the right temp to start with, the elements have to turn on bugger all. You know, they might turn on once or twice during the mash, especially if you've got it insulated with something, and that just makes everything easier for everybody in the system. You don't want to be putting cold water and grain in there and trying to heat it up, or, you know what I mean, or coming out 10 degrees down what you should be, and trying to use the elements, if you have, especially if you haven't got a pump, to try and bring it up to temperature. It just makes hard work for everything. Even with a pump, because you have to pump pretty slow because you're going through a grain, it'd take a long time for anything to catch up. But that's the same again with all systems, not just this system. So I've enjoyed brewing with it. It's been great fun actually, having to redo recipes and work out new sparge levels and mashing levels, because it's all a change from the system I've been using for the last 3 or 4 years. Been good fun. Anyway, don't be scared of them. I think they're alright. As far as I know, they've got a 12-month warranty. It's a great place to start, and if you haven't got the time or patience to build your own system, your beer's going to be just as good as anybody else's. The beer I've been drinking out of this is, hasn't been any different from my bigger 3-vessel system, of course. Anyway, I enjoy it. Hope you do too. Cheers.